Welcome to another episode of NBM Talks, a series of the Narrative-Based Medicine Lab, where we speak with individuals who are working at the intersection of literature, medicine, and health. Our guests are writers, clinicians, scholars, artists, and advocates who are pushing the boundaries of what's possible in the field. Together we discuss how we can engage with narrative-based medicine principles and practices in creative and diverse ways. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Sarah Kim, the Temerty Medicine, Medical Education, Health Humanities theme lead, and I'm here today with Dr. Lisa Richardson, who is the Interim Vice Dean of Strategy and the Associate Dean of Inclusion and Diversity here at the Temerty Faculty of Medicine. So hi, Lisa. Thank you for joining us. I wonder if we can just start with you telling us a bit more about your role and as well about your own experience in the world of the health humanities and narrative medicine.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. Really excited to be here. So currently I'm acting as the Vice Dean of Strategy, which means that it's a really exciting opportunity to look at all of the work that we're doing across the Faculty of Medicine and how to ensure that we're supporting everyone in the faculty and that we're moving forward with many of the priorities that we'd already determined, including excellence through equity, which relates to my work in the Associate Dean portfolio of Inclusion and Diversity. I practice clinical medicine. I'm an internal medicine specialist, and I work in the inpatient wards at Toronto General Hospital. And my background is as a mixed heritage Anishinaabe woman, so I do work in Indigenous health and Indigenous medical education, and started a center at Women's College called Ganawishkadawe, the Center for Wise Practices in Indigenous Health. So I think the connection around my Anishinaabe background is really important when I think about the entry into arts and humanities and healthcare. And it's in part because when we think about this distinction between science and science and medicine, or medical science and arts and culture, it's a very Western approach. And so when I think about how we consider health and wellness as Anishinaabe people, it's very much a holistic model of mind, body, spirit, emotion, and very connected to art and culture and language. And that becomes an intrinsic component of being well, and of thinking broadly about how we're also caring for people in our communities, that it's not just about the physical health and making a diagnosis and treatment, but it is how are we supporting their whole being, including recognizing their culture and the practices, those ancestral practices.
Right. Thanks, Lisa. Now, we've chatted before, and you have some really, really interesting projects already on the go and in the past. I'm wondering if there's something that you'd like to actually just tell us more about, in particular, actually, the Seeds of Change Gallery that you started up, but a lot of the other projects, I think many of our listeners would be really interested to hear.
Well, I love talking about the Seeds of Change Gallery because it was an initiative that I undertook with my sister, who was the lead of Indigenous arts at the Ontario Arts Council. And it relates to the work that at Women's College Hospital that I described, in trying to transform that hospital to become a safer place for Indigenous peoples. And so my sister was at the time also undergoing cancer treatment, and was a frequent visitor to hospital settings, and really experienced the exclusion and also the some of the trauma of being in clinical spaces. And so we had an opportunity with some funding to purchase art by Indigenous peoples. And so my sister, Sarah Rock, and Elwood Jimmy, who's also a leader in Indigenous arts, were able to reach out to contacts and curate a collection of art by Indigenous women and Two-Spirit people. And it's now on display at the hospital, in Women's College, throughout the hospital, across all the floors, and also in really key places, like when you enter into security, which is often a hostile place, especially for people who've been excluded from institutions or experienced racism, to have a beautiful, spectacular work of art by Shelley Nero, which includes the strawberry medicine, and one can relate to that and see that representation. It's really important. Another place we have a work of art is right at the entrance to the lab, which is often because of the experience of having your blood taken, and there's a physical touch. It can be a very traumatizing place for people. And so the idea of seeing a beautiful work of Indigenous art before entering that space is really important. So that's from the perspective of clients, users, patients in the healthcare system. But I think one of the ways in which I love using the Seeds of Change Gallery is also as an opportunity to educate learners and practitioners about Indigenous health. And so organizing, we have tours where we take medical students or other visitors to the hospital around to look at the work and engage in this activity of group looking, which was informed by a course that I used to teach with Dr. Alison Crawford at the Art Gallery of Ontario, where we use the visual thinking strategies as a way to sort of enter into sharing an experience of looking at art or engaging with art, but understanding that the perspective that you bring in your observation is maybe different than others who are looking at that work with you. And so when we start to vocalize what we're seeing aloud, what we're perceiving, we notice that, oh, well, isn't it funny how I'm interpreting this furrowed brow in this patient, or in the person in this painting, as distress, whereas the person next to me who's seeing the furrowed brow may be interpreting it as being quizzical or being curious. So recognizing that we may be observing what is the same thing, but we're interpreting that differently, and how powerful that is when we think about people having, that there is this diversity of experience, not only based on our backgrounds and lived experience, but also just our personal experiences, our education, our training, our family experiences. So I think using art as an entry point to teaching about Indigenous health has been really powerful in that way, because you get to understand that there are different ways in which one engages with art that may be based on background, but also because it's a way to take people's guard down. So when you're in that in a creative space, in a mindset of being wanting to take in art or create art, it allows us, I think, also to listen in a different way, and to also be able to be less defensive and less reactive, including looking at our own biases.
Thank you for that. I'm curious to hear a bit more around this idea of allowing other perspectives in to examine our own biases, and how you might feel that this is a tool for ways to begin to shape or influence, the past things about medical culture that we're trying to move beyond and move through, and professional identity development.
Definitely a question that's close to my heart. So thank you for bringing it up. I feel that it's been a big part of my work as a scholar in medical education, is, first of all, understanding that medicine is a culture. And so there is this perspective and paradigm based on the paradigm of empiricism, that medicine is separate from the socio-political historical context in which it operates. And, of course, this is connected with critical theory and studies in the social sciences and humanities, which recognize the situated knowledge of medicine and medical practice. And, thinking about the work of Foucault around psychiatry and how psychiatry evolved as a discipline, or thinking about how the medical gaze shifted based on, the anatomy and and actually cadaveric dissection, and how suddenly the gaze went from being one of, humors and senses to actually what could be directly observable. So that's just an example of the really specific way in which medical discourse changes based on the technology, tools, and environment of the time. And so I think, first of all, having people understand that medicine is not a place of no culture. It is a very specific culture, and medical education, we're entrained into that culture as we become physicians or healthcare providers. There are different cultures, I think, based on one's profession and specialty, but or healthcare profession. But I think having people come to see that is step one. And when you are engaging in this activity of understanding that people bring different perspectives to what appears to be an object of truth, that it can be approached empirically, and everyone sees the same thing, or everyone assumes the same thing, the act of actually unpacking that and realizing, oh, we're not all observing the same thing. We're actually understanding that there are multiple perspectives here. So being able to see multiple perspectives and appreciate that is really, really important as a first step to understanding that medicine is not a culture of no culture, but is actually very specifically located. And so I think that is step one. Is that too long? Have I explained that well? Okay. And I think then step two is, once we realize that medicine is very specifically and culturally located and situated, the next step is, what has been excluded from the way in which we are, the knowledges that are included, the ways of thinking that are included, and how do we actually expand our purview to recognize those knowledges? A classic one being, traditional healing from many of our Indigenous nations that are based on hundreds and thousands of years of traditional knowledge that's very, we call Indigenous science, that's grounded in the land and the knowledge of elders and traditional healers, which has been not allowed into medical spaces. And now with things like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, there's an understanding that actually those knowledges and forms of healing are really important for Indigenous peoples, alongside all of the best and amazing aspects of medical science that exist in our hospitals and clinics and community health centers. So I think that's step one, is realizing there are different ways of knowing outside of this culture of medicine, and that medicine is a very specific culture. And then two, what are those other ways that, and how have they been excluded, and what are the spaces that we have to make for them?
I have a lot of thoughts that come up as you speak. One of them in particular, though, that I'm curious about is the transformative potential that the arts have in terms of allowing us to see and learn in new ways. And I'm curious, as we really as a society make a commitment towards truth and reconciliation, how that positively affects all of us within the society. I'm curious if you have thoughts around that.
Thank you for that question. It's a big one. I think that first of all, one of the principles in the framework of truth and reconciliation is understanding that we are all treaty people. So regardless of our role here in the land now known as Canada, and whether one was present at one's ancestors were present at the time of many of contact or subsequent treaty negotiations, we all have a role to play by entering into this. Now, what does that do if we realize that we all have a role to play in reconciliation? I think it forces an inward journey. Or not forces, it encourages one to look inward. And I think that is where the transformative potential of arts and artistic practice come into medicine and medical education, because we are so used to putting on our white coats and erasing our backgrounds and our identities. And in so doing, also erasing the biases that we may carry, the particular situated perspectives that we bring, that we're constantly looking outward and we're not thinking about our own role in the interaction with our patients and with communities. And so I think that act of engaging with different forms of art and artistic practice and production is taking that moment to stop and thinking about one's own relationship with the work of art, how we're responding to it, why we're responding to it, why it's moving us, why it may not be moving us, and particularly when one is creating art, whether it be writing or engaging in music, I think, or any other form of practice, I think it really does help with getting us to look within. And one of my favorite teachings from a Anishinaabe elder is this idea of with every breath in, we're looking in. In the in breath, we're thinking about our own ourselves, and then when we breathe out, we're connecting to the world around us. So this understanding of relationality, which is so critical for our practices as physicians. So that's a long-winded way to say I think the transformative potential of art and of linked to reconciliation is understanding relationality as well, our relations with ourselves, but also the relation between us and whomever we're engaging with in our practice.
Wonderful. Thank you. Yeah, that's a real thought-provoking answer around sometimes the use of art as metaphor, how it's a tool. I'm also curious to hear more about, for you as an individual, like what regular practices that you engage in on your own, either for professional renewal or personal renewal, that tie into the practice of narrative medicine or integrating the arts or humanities.
So I did my undergraduate degree at McGill University, and I started in biology, which I really enjoyed. But right away, like within a semester of being there, I realized that there was something massive that was missing in my life. And so I ended up at that point, there was no option to do, a degree in both art and science. So I ended up, taking some courses in literature because I'd always loved writing and reading, and negotiating with the registrar how to get courses to count towards a major in English literature and then also a major in biology. So it was like I had, I think, almost no electives throughout my undergraduate degree, but ended up graduating with majors in biology and English, which was really quite cool at the time because this was a long time ago. But that points to my love of reading, and I also, in reading, love writing. And so I used to write a lot when I was younger. That practice has changed in that I still love reading, especially now given probably the way in which my life is quite busy. I love escaping in works of poetry, so I find that to be a very distilled form of writing that is very inspiring for me. So I will often have a book of poetry in my bag or on my bedside table. But also realizing that as a very visual person, and probably because of my sister's legacy and her interest, is visual art. And so understanding early on, even when I've always loved visual art as well, and so organized an exhibit by medical students when I was in my first year of medical school, and really continued with that act of engaging with visual art, and especially with visual art by Indigenous artists.
Wonderful. I'm curious as well, is there a book, film, or art exhibition or theater piece, something you've come across in the last little bit that has shifted your perspective somehow? And if you'd be open to saying some words about that.
Am I allowed to share two?
Sure. Yeah.
Because I'm going to share two. I've just described two
That's great.
forms. So one is I came across the work of Sarah Flores, who is an Indigenous artist from Peru, who and I saw her work at an art fair in Miami, and then I sought out her work at an art gallery that represents her in New York City, and I was truly blown away by this work. It's very large scale, and it's a practice called Kene, Kene. So it's grounded in in her own nation and her the traditional practices of her people. And she actually creates dyes from from the environment around her, and uses these dyes to create these spectacular geometric patterns on large scale works, often linen. And they're it's a highly spiritual practice as well. So for me, it really embodies this, mind, body, spirit, emotion way in which I think about well-being. But one of the striking things about her work, and they're very, very expensive, is that she donates the proceeds from her work back to her community. And so it's this communal understanding of creating and selling, which was also so unique, because I get really frustrated by the commercial art market and the way in which certain people are, become these superstars and make millions, and then there are many other people practicing who are, barely able to pay their bills. And so just struck by this idea of really disrupting that by, yes, making money from the art, but then having that go back to her village and community. Really spectacular work, and the story of her artistic creations, and also the way in which she contributes back to community, to me really embodies many Indigenous values. And then the second is a work that is always on my bedside table by a Anishinaabe writer, Richard Wagamese, called Embers, and it's One Ojibwe's Meditation. So Richard Wagamese was a wonderful novelist, but also writes these encapsulates a lot of his own teachings and reflections through his practice. So really important for me when I'm feeling unmoored by some of the stress or difficulty of my work, to actually go back to teachings and his beautiful insights.
That's great. Thank you for sharing both of those. Though they're always welcome, and I think our listeners appreciate hearing about things also to check out on their own. I'm curious if there's, as you've been reflecting on these two works, if there are thoughts that you have that you would want to say to our listeners around some of the perspectives that you've gained as you've journeyed through and experienced various forms of art and been influenced with them. If there are some thoughts that come to mind for particular different audiences, for example, for our colleagues or those who are interested in the practice of narrative medicine, but also in as someone who is within the Faculty of Medicine in a leadership role, things that you might want to say to the learners around things that carry a lot of value for you and have throughout your career thus far.
I want to give people, not just give people permission, but encourage them to explore and explore the arts. And that may mean picking up a book from a story from a land, a nation, a writer who's different from your own, so it may not be as familiar, and having an opportunity to enter into the world of another person through that story and through that literary journey. It may mean stepping into a gallery, which is not a place where you would typically feel welcome, and just taking up that space and being able to be open and meditative and enjoy the environment. You don't have to have a fancy art degree or background to engage. It may be losing oneself to a song or to playing an instrument, and understanding that any of these activities and many, many more must be are an integral part of being human, and hence an important part of our well-being as practitioners, scientists, clinicians, researchers, teachers, learners. So not to separate out all of these different practices from your life in the faculty, because I think that separation leads to distress and means that we're not fulfilled. We may feel like a part of ourselves is missing, and how to continue to not only allow that but encourage that.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I'm wondering that in closing, if there's an excerpt from a poem or prose that you'd like to share with us as we wind down the conversation.
So I'm going to read from the book that I had cited earlier, Richard Wagamaise's Embers. There is such a powerful eloquence in silence. True genius is knowing when to say nothing, to allow the experience, the moment itself, to carry the message, to say what needs to be said. Words are less important, less effective than feeling. When you can sit in perfect silence with someone, you truly know how to communicate.
Thank you, Lisa. I think that's a perfect way to close our session for today. And again, I thank you very much. We had Lisa Richardson here, who is the Interim Vice Dean of Strategy at the Temerty Faculty of Medicine, and also Associate Dean of Inclusion and Diversity. And I'm Sarah Kim, the Medical Education Health Humanities Lead for the Temerty Faculty of Medicine. And I thank you for listening today.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this conversation, check out many other episodes. And if you're interested in learning more about narrative-based medicine, visit us online at narrativebasedmedicine.ca for more great content and to explore our upcoming offerings.